Okay, hello everyone. My name is Audra Sterling, and I am a professor in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders. And I wanted to say thank you so much to the Wasteman Center for inviting me to come and speak to you all today. And also hello to everyone online. Please let us know too. I'm going to have some video clips to show, so let us know if the sound's not working. Today, I wanted to talk about some of the work that we have been doing in my lab. So as I said, I'm in the Communication Sciences and Disorders Department, and I am really passionate about understanding how kids learn how to communicate. And so the studies that I do range from very young kids, toddlers, the youngest we have are 2-year-olds, all the way through really school-age individuals through 18, 19, 20. And we think about a lot of different challenges. And so if you're not thinking about language as I do, as deeply as I do, I want you to think about how many times during the day you use language, right? It's such a basic human right to be able to communicate. And yet it can be a significant challenge for many individuals, particularly those with Down syndrome. So instead of focusing on the older kids, as I mentioned, we do have work in my lab that does focus on more complex language. Love to talk about that. Reach out to me if you want to learn more. I'm going to talk about the little kids because Ruth is going to talk about older kids later. And so one of the really powerful things about thinking about language learning in young kids is how they communicate with familiar caregivers, right? So caregiver-child interactions are so important for language learning. And I'm going to try to sell you on the importance of this and tell you some of the work that we're doing. So I'm going to focus on 2 studies that we've done. One is using gestures, and I use a lot of gestures. Also, when you leave today, think about how often you use gestures all the time. Gestures are so important. And then shared book reading, which is another great context for learning language. I'm going to tell you about a study that we're doing right now too. Okay, and before I start, I always like to give my financial disclosures. I'm a paid faculty member here at UW-Madison. I've received grant funding for a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about today from the National Institutes of Health, and have reviewed grants for the NIH and received compensation for that. All right, so language learning. I already gave you my spiel why I love language, and kids are amazing language learners. For any of you who are parents or teachers in the audience, you know that kids are learning from the moment they open their eyes in the morning until they close their eyes at night. They are taking things in their environment. Sometimes even things we don't necessarily want them to hear, right? Especially our little kids. I always say that too. They are listening to everything you say. And these interactions that kids learn from, they can be with caregivers, they can be with peers, they can be from anything in their environment, right? They're taking it all in. But particularly for really young kids, we think a lot about those caregiver-child interactions because they spend a lot of time with their caregivers. Those are really the fundamental relationships for young children. We also know that the presence of a disability can change the course of language acquisition from what we think about in neurotypical individuals. So in my lab, we study genetic disorders, so Down syndrome, and also Fragile X syndrome, which I'm not going to talk about today, but is also a really important genetic syndrome to consider. And so what does this mean if you have Down syndrome for the course of your language acquisition? So Maria had a beautiful slide telling us about some of the co-occurring conditions that we see in Down syndrome. I have language impairment at the top because, again, that's what I study. Also, intellectual disability is common among individuals with Down syndrome. We in my lab think a lot about the intersection between those two. Hearing loss and ear infections, which we're going to hear about next from my colleague, Ruth Latofsky. Visual impairments, if you have co-occurring autism, which Maria had mentioned that for a long time, we didn't think about this in detail. And now we know that quite a few individuals with Down syndrome have co-occurring autism. So what does that mean for development? And then a host of other things. But again, for today, we're going to focus on this language impairment piece. Oops. Okay. And so I love thinking about language development through the lens of naturalistic environments. So for young kids, what does that mean? It's often through these caregiver-child interactions. And so we think about caregiver-child interactions, particularly in young kids. So I've got some very young kids here, and you see like how much you can take in from this moment in time, right? Like from facial expressions and the language that you're hearing. And really, though, this is something that we can consider throughout the lifespan. That's why I have this older picture. Also, if you're like, my goodness, who are these adorable children over here? Yes, I shamelessly put in a picture of my own kids. But I love this picture because it was my birthday a few years ago, and they are singing happy birthday to me. And my oldest is telling me some funny story about a birthday, while my youngest is sneaking some frosting off the cake. And so in this moment, there's all kinds of things going on, and we're all learning from each other and interacting. And it's this really like great moment. And so those are the moments that we really love to try and capture and understand how parents are supporting language. In my lab, we also very much view it as the caregivers are the experts in their child, right? They know what their child likes, what they don't like, what they respond well to, what they don't respond well to, when they're tired, what their cues are for like they're frustrated. And in my lab, we are the experts in language, and I use experts loosely, of course, but we want to partner with the parents. Okay, so what are you already doing? That's great in your interactions. And now how can we help you sneak in some more language facilitating strategies to really maximize language learning? And the best way to see this is to watch some clips. And also it's fun because the kids are absolutely adorable. I do have permission from the families to show these clips. And so I want to show you two different interactions. So what we've done in these studies is we go into the families' homes, we bring books and toys, and we set up our camera and we say, please just play with your child as you normally would. And what I want you to notice from these two interactions is how fun they are for the kids, how supportive the parents are, and all these opportunities that they're using to build on what their kids are doing and help them learn language. So in the first one, the little boy is interacting with his dad, and he's not using words, but he's very much communicating with his dad, and his dad is like right with him. So he's gonna, expand on what his son is saying. In the second video, I love because the little girl is using tons of gestures. So those are the two things I want you to pay attention to. How is the child communicating with their parent? And then how is the parent really supporting that? Okay, and even though Clark, you told me how to run this, I'm gonna do it this way.
You want to do the puzzle? Should we push them to the side? Want to do this, the puzzle with me? Here, we can do the puzzle. Yeah, the dog, he goes in here. I'll hold the bag open, and we put him in the right bag. Then we'll put the animal. But no, remember the dinosaurs go in this bag. Remember the dinosaurs go in one bag, and the animals go in another. You got cow, donkey, and a horse. Oh, three of them. But and then the dinosaurs.
And that's 10 minutes.
Oh,
So you guys can walk off whenever you.
Oh, oops, no. Okay, so he's not talking, but he's trying to, right? He's like telling him, this is what I'm interested in. These are the toys. And dad is right with him, right? Like, oh, this is the cow. There's three of them. All these beautiful language labels. All right, now let's watch this one with my
You want to
gesture examples.
put him through the door? You want to put him through the window? Billy, look, they're living up. They live upstairs.
Yeah.
Yeah, now you can turn around and see them. That's pretty cool, huh? There's a sheep down here. There's a wolf. Hey. You're the farmer. Who's the farmer? Oh, please don't sit on that place. Thank you. Where are you gonna put the farmer? He's gonna stand on the roof. Is he gonna slide down? Look at Kay, it's kind of like a slide. Make him slide.
What a great interaction, and also so creative. Like, oh, he's standing on the roof. What's more fun than that? Something naughty standing on the roof. But now we're using it as a slide, building on that language. I love everything about these clips. So you can see how much they were really like building off of each other and interacting. And I also showed you that clip because now I'm going to lead us into a study we did on gestures. Okay, so gestures, so important. Also, gestures tend to be a strength. and Down syndrome. A lot of individuals with Down syndrome use gestures, particularly when they're young, and it really helps with communication. And so one of the things that we were interested in is how are caregivers building on these gestures, right? So one thing that we think about in clinical practice is something called recodes. So recodes are like interpreting and building on something. So if I point to something as a child, if I'm pointing to that fun little play set, and then mom is like, oh yeah, that's the farmer. The farmer's going to stand on the roof. She's now building on what her child is interested in. And it is an incredibly powerful language tool. Okay, again, another picture of my kids. But this was my son, Max, when he was just 18 years old. And we had just gone to a splash pad for the first time. Have you ever been to a splash pad? There's a lot of stuff going on at splash pads, right? They're very exciting. And so we got there and he's like, oh, and he had this, I can't believe I got this picture. It's like one of my all-time favorite pictures of him pointing to the splash pad. That is a moment where he's telling me, I'm interested in this. This is cool. I'm paying attention. And now I can build on that and provide all kinds of words and help him enrich his vocabulary. Okay. So that is one of the reasons why we're so interested in this. So our research questions were, are kids using gestures frequently when they're interacting with mom? This is just about mom. Sorry, dad, but don't worry. We will get to dads later. And then how are moms responding to those gestures? What are they doing with it? So we had 22 kids with Down syndrome, and then we had 22 kids with neurotypical development. These are 2 to 5-year-olds. Moms were the same in age and education, and the kids were different in language, but that's what we would expect in their development. And so we went into the home, we brought toys and books and snack, and we're like, just interact as you normally would. We videotaped them for 21 minutes. We did a developmental assessment. Then we go in and we do this very time-intensive coding where we first type out every single thing that the mom and the kid said, and then we look for gestures. So we define gestures as any kind of intentional movement. So like sign language, pointing, intentionally showing things, giving things, asking for things, nodding your head. There's so many different ways that we use gestures. And then what did the moms do with it? Did they respond to it? Did they build on it? Did they provide a verbal label of it? Okay, so this is what we found. So the kids with Down syndrome were using tons of gestures. Here in the black, we have the kids with Down syndrome. And this is over here, the total number of gestures, and these are our groups. Look at all this. One kid had over 200 gestures. It's a lot. That kid, by the way, was using tons of signs. But the kids with Down syndrome, 82 gestures on average during that 21 minutes of interaction. And their peers, their neurotypical peers, were using about 51. Lots of gestures. Now, what are the moms doing? The moms of the kids with Down syndrome and the moms of the neurotypical kids were strikingly similar. They were almost identical. So 42% of the time, they were using those gesture recodes. That's awesome. What that tells me is that this is a very naturally occurring thing, right? Like this is something moms are already great at doing. This is exactly what we want to see. This is like one of the things speech pathologists work on with families in birth to 3 intervention. And whether or not your child has a language impairment or not, moms are good at doing this. So good job to caregivers. Now this one over here, down here, we have the child's age, and over here, we have the percentage of the amount of time that the moms use recodes. And it's interesting because these black circles are the kids with Down syndrome. I have each kid plotted out on this figure. And then the gray are the kids with neurotypical development. So the moms of the older kids with Down syndrome are using more of those recodes, but we see the opposite pattern in moms of neurotypical kids. So as for older neurotypical kids, moms are using gesture recodes less. Maybe they just don't feel like they need them as much. And maybe the moms of the kids with Down syndrome feel like as the kids are 4 and 5 years old, this is the perfect time to use these gesture recodes, right? They're like primed and ready for it. So moms are already really good at doing this, and this is exactly what we want to see. Now, can we build on it? Can we move? I don't ever expect to see 100% of the time we're using recodes. That would be very unnatural. I actually tried it out on my own kids just to see, and it was weird. And they were like, why are you doing this? So that's not my goal. But my goal is maybe to move from 42% to like 60%. So already doing it, but does that feel natural? One of the things that is really important to us is, do caregivers buy into this? Do they like it? Does it feel natural? Is this something we can build into everyday routines? Parents are busy, families are busy. How can we make this something that's very natural for them? We only had moms, and we all know that caregivers are not just moms, and a pretty small sample. So with that in mind, I want to talk about how we've included dads in our studies. And I should have said too, I had a picture of her and I forgot to say that last study was led by a really amazing former doctoral student in my lab, Emily Lorraine. So now I had a couple of postdocs that I had the pleasure of working with, Noel Maltman and Lizzie Hilvert, and they were like, okay, well, how are moms and dads similar or different in their interactions with their young kids with Down syndrome? So we looked at book reading for this one. And so again, we go into the home, we do these video recordings of book reading, but what we were particularly interested in is, first of all, what are they doing during book reading? Are they reading the book? Are they talking about the book? But also, are they using something called decontextualized language? So contextualized language is like the here and now. What's going on in this room that we can all see? You know, I can talk about how Maria just gave this fabulous talk, how we had coffee that I'm drinking and donuts and all the things. But decontextualized input is things that we can't immediately see. So later today, I got to go to Discount Tire to get, my tires changed, and my kids have a play date, like those types of things, maybe in the future, or not something I can immediately see. And decontextualized input is so great for academic development and language. But we were like, are parents using it? Does it feel natural? And book reading can be a good place to study it. So we wanted to see, how are parents engaging in book reading? Are there differences between moms and dads? And then is that related to their kids' language abilities? So we had 15 families, and in each family we had mom, dad, and child, 2 to 5 year olds. Parents were super similar. And we went into their home, again, did our videotaping, and we did a developmental assessment. So this table here, what I want to point out from this is, again, we type out every single thing that everybody says, which takes a lot of time. And then we think about like, okay, well, what did their talking look like? So parents are super similar on what we call lexical diversity. So it's really just the number of different words. We literally count up like we don't, they have a computer program that does it for us, but what's the richness of the vocabulary that they're using? And then grammatical complexity. Are they using super simple utterance talking? Are they talking in really complex sentences? Very, very similar. But moms were overall talking more during the interaction, and dads were reading the book verbatim more. Pretty similar though. But what we did find is that neither group was using a lot of decontextualized language. Now, these are 2 to 5 year olds, not super surprising, but this also tells me it's not something that parents feel is very naturally occurring. So maybe this isn't the right context for it, or maybe it's not the right time, or maybe it's something we can work on with the families. But then when we think about the contextualized input, when they're talking and they're not reading verbatim, the only thing that they were different on was description. So like, if you think about reading a book with a child, maybe they point to something and they're like, yeah, that's a cow. I wonder what the cow's going to do. This monkey's swinging through the jungle. Like, you can read the book verbatim, or you might just use it as a platform to talk about the things that you see on the page. But both moms and dads were engaging in conversation at the same rate. They were asking questions really similarly. So they look very, very, very similar. And whether or not it was related to their child's language abilities, it was a little bit. Moms seemed to be a little more in tune with kind of their kids' grammatical complexity and like how many different words the kids were using. And dads were using more of that decontextualized language. Remember, not talking about the here and now, with their kids who had a little bit stronger language skills. So dads seemed to be more sensitive to that. So moms and dads, super, super, super similar. Most of the time when we're looking at these book reading contexts, they're talking about the here and now. And interestingly, they're not reading verbatim that much. Now, again, for those of you who are parents or have worked with young kids, do 2 to 5-year-olds always love to sit and listen to you read verbatim in a book? I mean, not mine. So, like book reading doesn't have to be reading every single word from the page. It can also be like we explore the book together in a way that's really fun. And these parents are doing a great job of that. So how can we build more of this decontextualized language input? This is like one of the central themes of my research program is how can we enrich language in a way that parents feel comfortable with and that they feel like is naturally occurring. Because I can give you, like when we train our speech pathology students, they'll say, I gave the parents all this homework and they didn't do it. And I'm like, who has time for all that? Do you do your homework for my class to completion? No. So you can't give them 10 hours of homework. But what we can do is build it into everyday routines and make it feel very natural. And that is our goal. So all this led up to the study that I'm going to super briefly tell you about. And Maria did such a beautiful job of telling you about the Include initiative, so I don't really need to even go over that. But my colleague Liza Feinstack, who's at the University of Minnesota, and I got a small grant to think about, okay, so how can we, do these interactions and how can we do these assessments in a way that's going to be really accessible for families? Leveraging technology. That's where our little Tommy acronym, we were so proud of this, came from. So part of the problem with current clinical models is that we have to drive to families or families have to drive to us. We live in Wisconsin, in a state that has a lot of rural communities, also a state that has hard winters. It's not always easy to drive hours places. It's not easy for clinicians to get everywhere. Also, wintertime is also prime time for respiratory illnesses and all kinds of fun little things that affect young kids. It's not always easy for families to come into a clinic to drive 2 hours. And we don't have a ton of speech pathologists in some of our rural areas. So we're like, how can we make this more accessible to families and also meaningful for what we're trying to get? So our traditional measures that we've used to track progress and do assessments, they're expensive. Like it's hard to do them. Standardized tests. Anybody here done a standardized test? It's not the most exciting thing. 2 to 5-year-olds don't love sitting through standardized tests. How can we make this though so that we're really accurately capturing their language in a way that's naturalistic? So that was like the whole basis of this. So one thing that we thought is, okay, well, what if we coach families to record themselves? And we send them what they need and then they upload those videos and then we can do assessments that way, make it much more telehealth friendly. So we're like, we're going to do this with 2 to 5-year-olds and their caregivers, focusing on Down syndrome. So we're like, we'd like you to do these recordings. You can pick an activity. We call it our choice activity. We give them some ideas. They can do what they want. We're like, just please don't do it while you're eating, because if you're eating, we can't understand what you're saying. And then we send them a play set and we're like, now we want to see you play together. So we have this little kit that Megan, who's in the audience here, knows all about because she has mailed and or driven it to many families. So we give you toys and materials. We also give a little play mat because 2 to 5-year-olds don't always love sitting still, but we found if we send a fun little play mat that they will sit. And we do need to we want to like be able to see them. That's the challenge, right? And then a tripod and a recording device. We spent a ton of time developing materials to make this easy for families. So we have videos of how to do the recordings. We also have like paper copies. Some people prefer watching, some people prefer reading. We tell you how to upload all the videos too. And then, again, because videos are always fun, here's an example of one of our videos. So mom is recording this. We're not here. That's one of the really cool things. It's not like somebody's sitting there with a recorder watching them, right? Which can be a little distracting and feel a little funny. So she's doing all this recording herself. Also, do you see how he's wearing this little vest here? We also send a little audio recorder and they wear it in this little vest. So one of the things we want to see is it easier to do audio recordings or video recordings? Secretly, I'm hoping that the video recordings are better because in audio, I'm going to miss those gestures. I'm going to miss a lot of what I think is really important information. But the audio recorders are really easy to move around with. They capture everything the child says. Who doesn't love knocking over a block tower? So that's one of the goals of our study is then like, is it better with the video? Is it better with the audio? We have a number of different things that we're doing. So far we've collected data on more than 30 participants with Down syndrome. We only have a handful left that we need to do. Again, this is in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And we also got a little supplement to try this out in kids who are late talkers. So they don't have Down syndrome, they don't have a genetic disability, but they're also struggling with learning how to talk. So all of this is to lead up to these interventions that are trying to, as effectively and efficiently as possible, help kids communicate fully in their lives, leverage those strengths that they have, especially like thinking about those gestures, and then fine tune assessments and what's going to feel natural and work for the families. So I am eternally grateful to the Wasteman Center, the mentors that I've had, my amazing team in the lab, to the families who let us come into their homes, who record these interactions and let us be a part of their lives. And also thank you to all of you for listening today. And I would love to answer any questions. Also, my email address is up here and you can find me. And my lab and I are happy to answer questions at any time about language. So thank you. Yes.
I was just thinking about what you said about decentralized input. What is the best way to do that with pediatric school bus?
Ooh.
We're across those a lot.
So the question for those in Zoom was thinking about that contextualized and decontextualized language input, especially with the Magic School Bus books. And so you said that you see those a lot.
Yeah, they're a really interesting platform.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So one of the things that we love to think about is what's fun and of interest to kids. And I think a lot of kids do love the Magic School Bus. Plus we've got the books and isn't there like shows and videos on it too? Yeah. And my kids liked it too. So what's a good way to do that? Well, I would say, if you have a child who really enjoys those books, think about, what their experience might have been with even like a bus. So the Magic School Bus, of course, does all kinds of things that maybe we don't all get to experience in reality. But what about seeing a bus out on the street, or a movie that you've seen with a bus, or, if the child's in daycare? I mean, my kids, before they started riding the bus to school, boy, if there was a daycare field trip and they got to ride the bus, it was so exciting. So we can talk about, remember that time that you got to ride the bus to the pumpkin patch and how exciting that was, and start thinking about like things that have occurred in the past, or even you could just make up a story that builds on, that book. Like maybe the two of you together create a story, or, funny things that have happened. A lot of kids really enjoy like coming up with, getting to like be creative and come up with silly things that, they might think would be a fun adventure. So those are just a couple of things that come to mind. I love that question. Like, how can we think about materials that kids really love and enjoy?